How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to be talking about questions every rookie should be asking themselves. And we're going to kind of fall into 6 categories. We're going to talk about questions about adjusting to the environment, questions about establishing authority and understanding inmate culture, questions about balancing professional relationships. Then we got dealing with stress and burnout. Questions about learning procedures and protocols, and then my favorite topic, questions about handling inmate manipulation. My guest today is going to be Joe Pomponio. I'm going to ask him a personal question first based on his experience in the profession, so Joe can kind of dig into, his past experiences. And then we will also share 2 questions in each section in which we both can share and just give out practical tips and advice. It's going to be a fun discussion, but we're also going to make it more personal. And Joe has not gotten these questions ahead of time, which is what we do. So Joe's going to jump right in, take the ball, and run wherever the ball may lead. Guys, now real quick, if you haven't, I have a couple of books on the market. Don't forget, guys, I have Inmate Manipulation Decoded. That book is available on Amazon. It's used for training all across the country. I would definitely recommend you get your hands on this book. Link to that book is in the description. I also have a good partner book with that. It's an ebook, but it's on its way to becoming a soft cover book, and it's right here, Breaking Boundaries, Understanding and Preventing Undue Familiarity in Corrections. If you get both these books, so this one or this one, you have a great chance to create some good training if you're interested in training, your staff on manipulation, whether it's the rookies, senior staff, civilians. These books pretty much put together cover a lot. Very extensive, definitely worth a full day training. I also have, there it is, tips for new correctional officers and their supervisors, as well as how to succeed in corrections, lessons learned from working in prison. Both these books are available on Blue 360 Media. Link to both these books are in the description. And I do have 3 other books that they are in the process of publishing right now. One's on leadership, one's on dealing with unruly inmates, and the other one is on report writing. And I believe they are available for pre-purchase. So if you guys are interested, check out the website, get those books ahead of time. When you get those books, they don't just come with the paperback or the actual book. It also comes with an ebook and just a bunch of training resources in there as well, how to break down the book. It's pretty cool what Blue 360 Media does with the books. All right, let me get Joe. What up, Joe?
What's happening, brother?
Joe, how's life? How you doing?
I'm good, man. Just kind of hanging out on this hot 103-degree summer day, cleaning the inside of the house and, doing what the single man does.
Single. I was thinking about going outside, but it's a little too hot. The iPad would get a little heated up, so I'm winding up doing this in the living room. The family's down the shore, so I got a little free time. So I figure, why not talk shop? I got no kids screaming. Hey, Joe, you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections, 29 years and 6 months. I'm currently working as an assistant jail administrator in our local sheriff's department in the jail division and a panel member here for Tier Talk.
Yes, and by the way, as always, Joe, we love having you. So, Joe, these are questions that I think would be good for rookies to kind of ask themselves, but maybe even for senior staff to be aware that these questions exist, because these could be great talking points when dealing with the rookie. So I thought what I could do is get right into it. I can ask you a personalized question for each section. And then also for each section, I have 2 questions that we could also just discuss on. So before we get into each section, because the first section, as I said, is adjusting to the environment, whatever, there's six of them. I thought the first question I have for you, Joe, that's kind of related to the introduction, not really the section, but Joe, reflecting on your own first year in corrections, what was the most surprising challenge you faced that you hadn't anticipated?
I think the most surprising to me was establishing myself. You go through the academy and you come out, done with your schooling as a recruit. And I was under the assumption that once you come in, you're kind of automatically accepted. And that's not the case. I learned, surprisingly, that I pretty much had to establish myself. I had to prove myself to everybody to let them know, that I was there to be part of the team, do whatever needed to be done to help the team to get things done. That would probably be the most surprising out of it all.
For me, I started my career at a female facility. For me, it was you have to engage with the inmate population. You are going to be communicating with them. You are going to interact with them. And I think I didn't realize how much those interactions would be. My perspective going in was not the correct perspective. I thought a lot of them were going to be locked up all day and very limited interaction besides just passing by and doing counts or whatever it is. But then when I got into corrections, I found out that the world was extremely active. Inmates are out most of the day, and you are going to be interacting with inmates. So be ready for conflict. Be ready for trying to problem solve. So again, you got to be engaged. Now, Joe, two questions, kind of related to the introduction, but why do you believe the first year is so crucial for rookie correctional officers, and what makes it a make or break period for many?
Well, again, establishing yourself is one of those important factors, because you want them to see that you're a part of the team. Getting out there and trying to get out there in a mix when you're still trying to learn the facility, you're trying to learn the procedures, you're trying to learn the layouts. You want to be helpful, but even though you go through the recruit training and the FTO, you're still learning processes and procedures. So you're not quite in that helpful stage yet. You're still kind of, let me see this a couple of times and I'll take it from there. And what was that second question, Anthony?
Part of it was what makes it a make or break period for many.
The make or break for me was, during that time, there was a lot going on. We had a lot of gang issues back then, a lot of gang homicides, a lot of gang hits, a lot of long hours. And if you are a family man, with wife and kids at home, those long hours kind of take a toll on both sides of the fence. And learning how to balance and manage your time between the two, that was probably the make or break for me. But I knew I wanted it to be a career. So learning to manage my time and hanging in there. They say if you make it through the first year, it's all downhill from there. Within that year, you're going to see many things. You're going to see long hours. You're going to be involved in a use of force. Depending on your facility, you may be a victim of a riot. There's a lot of things that can happen that are unexpected that could take a toll stress-wise on you. Having that high stress factor helps if you're well adjusted. So I would say definitely that first year is make or break.
Yeah, and guys, this isn't a job that you simply say yes to. You don't say yes to the role; you accept the role. When you accept the role, it's a huge responsibility. There's sacrifices. However we may view them as fair or unfair, it comes with the expectation that you accepted the role. So when you're in corrections and when you decide to, take that oath, it's not an oath that you simply say yes to. It's an oath that really is. It's accepting the role, the responsibility, the consequences. I mean, it's a commitment. For me, I think what to answer why you believe the first year is so crucial for rookie correctional officers and what makes it a make or break period for many is that's the foundation. When you enter at the very beginning of corrections, you're setting your template. You're basically letting people know who you are, not just the inmates, but your staff and whatnot. And sometimes making mistakes at the very beginning can be very detrimental because you don't have the confidence yet. So having said that, I think the reason why I feel it's a make or break is because you don't have confidence just yet in your role. So with that said, a simple mistake at the very beginning weighs a lot more than a huge mistake. I don't know why there's fireworks going on in the background there. That was weird. Weighs a lot more than it would be if you made a mistake or a simple mistake towards the end or as you're more matured in the profession. So again, I find it to be foundational at the very beginning. and making a mistake can carry a lot of weight. But again, that's why we're all supposed to be working together, showing support to the rookie, because we're going to balance. We're going to help balance them when they need their confidence. When they make a mistake, we're going to cultivate them until they can wind up looking inward what they need to move them forward. Joe, the second question, from your experience, and this is still related to the introduction, from your experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions rookies might have before they start the job? I think we kind of touched on it when we talked about your experience, but if you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah, the biggest misconception that every day is normal. When it comes to corrections, there's no such thing as normal. It's not your typical Monday through Friday 8 to 5 job that you walk into. Even though we try to accomplish the same tasks every day, it's definitely much different in a correctional setting. There's no such thing as normal when you walk in the gates, and your day may be filled with either uses of forces, it may be filled with emergencies, it may be filled with medical issues. The day is a whole gamut of what it can be. It can be from good to hectic to bad, and everything in between. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception, is that you walk in the gates on time and that you're going to leave on time, because sometimes that does not happen.
Yeah, and I'm also going to add, I don't know where people may be doing their research before they enter. I know now it's a lot different, but when I entered, we didn't really have channels like this or Facebook groups or stuff like that. But if by chance, you're only getting your information from TV shows and the media, you're going to think the world that you're entering is a big us versus them. Correctional officers on this side and inmates on the other. And that's not the case. I believe at some level there is a working professionalism where most of the inmates won't be the problem, believe it or not. Yes, there will be some, and they probably take up a majority of your time, but most inmates are going to try to move forward and do the right thing. So I don't want people walking into this profession thinking that it's us versus them. I don't think that's the case. I'm not going to say it's us and them. I'm not putting us into that level of partnership, but I don't want to say it's us versus them, because technically our role is centered on us being able to do what we can to provide a safe and secured environment, yes, but also to rehabilitate and start moving them forward. So if you walk into this environment thinking it's us versus them, then I don't think you're going to be that committed to that aspect of the rehabilitation side. I mean, yes, safety and security, we know we got that coming in. But what else are we really trying? Well, we're preparing the person for long term. So basically, maybe one day they're going to get released. What are we doing behind the wall? So I think having the us versus them mentality kind of limits our want to be involved in that process. So again, I'm not going to say it's an us and them, but I don't want you to think that. I don't want you to think that because it's not us and them, it's automatically us versus them. You're not coming into corrections with this us versus them mentality. It's not what you're going to see when you come in. You're actually going to see a lot of effort in trying to do our best to move these inmates forward. All right, so I think that's our introduction. Okay, so now the first thing we got right now, Joe, is adjusting to the environment. So again, I'm going to start you off with a personal question, and then after that, we're gonna share in with the dialogue, and I may comment a little on my personal experience as well. Why not have a little fun? I don't think this is going to be a long episode, but with that said, so here's the personal question. Joe, and I'm looking at you, Joe. When you first started, what was the moment that made you realize the gravity of working in a correctional facility?
I think the moment that it was walking in, the first facility I stepped on, that I walked into, that I was assigned to, the Ramsey 2 unit, was an old facility that was built in 1902. And walking in and hearing those wrought iron gates close behind you and the sound they made, that was probably the first time that I realized that I was in a correctional facility. Every time something opened, you hear a gate slam. It was an older facility. It wasn't modernized in any way, shape, or form. The cell blocks were 3 tiers high. You had to hand crank the doors open, hand crank them shut. You know, being in that type of environment, and of course, you know, witnessing my first homicide, those are probably two of the biggest moments that I knew that, you know, it was reality slapped in my face that, you know, I was in a prison.
I think for me, I mean, yes, I definitely agree. I mean, you are going to be hit with reality. It doesn't matter what they teach you or what you research going in. Once you're in there dealing with it, it's a whole different ball game. I think for me, I always knew it was a career. So I definitely took matters very seriously. I wanted to be the best that I could be. But again, it's funny how you may want to go in being the best, and then all of a sudden reality hits you, and it's not as easy as you think it is. So I got to agree with Joe on, you know, when you have that first emergency code, or, you know, maybe an incident like a homicide or a suicide, it does wake you up. It does let you know that you're in the real world, and your responsibility in this world is unmatched. I mean, I think that's what it is. It's your responsibility in this world and what you are responsible for. I mean, Joe mentioned he witnessed a homicide. You know, I mean, that's something that I'm not saying he did, but ultimately these are the actions that we have to stop. That means that showed Joe that, holy shit, this is real. They do these things behind this wall. That means that, you know, they may tell you in the academy, and remember, we're responsible for these things, but then you're thinking like, well, we're responsible for stopping these things. They think, oh, what's the likelihood of this happening? And then Joe gets in on the first year and sees it's happening, and Joe's like, oh my God, it's real. So I'm responsible for this. Like, and when I say responsible, if you don't stop it, technically you have some level of responsibility in how it's played out.
And
But Joe,
there's sometimes that you can't stop it, you know, and that was kind of the case with that first homicide of mine. It happened on the rec yard between two Mexican rival gangs, and one walked up to the other, and he had a weapon, stuck it in his gut, and moved it from the left side to the right side, and emptied his intestines out onto the ground. And when that convict hit the ground, he reached down, grabbed a handful of this guy's intestines, and threw him up into the razor wire on the rec yard fence. Walked over to me just as calm and dropped the shank and proned out. And dude, when I tell you, it felt like it took me 10 minutes to get a set of handcuffs on that dude from the adrenaline and the fear coursing through my body. You know, it was strange because the convict, as we were escorting him down the hallway, full of blood, both of us were, you know, he was actually calming me down. He's telling me, boss, it's okay. It's over with now. You weren't in any danger. It's all over. And man, the word reality, you know, when something like that happens, it makes you not stop, but pause and actually reflect and look back and look forward, you know, to, do I really want to do this? And, you know, they say, you know, when you witness a homicide like that, you know, if you come back the next day, you pretty much, you got it matched. I'm not saying there's no effects mentally from it, but, you know, they say that, you know, if you're willing to get back in that saddle and keep driving forward, it's a positive sign for you and your career. But, you know, it's one of those things where you see it on TV, on Law and Order and all these other police shows where these guys get killed in prison, you know, and it's just a kind of a fade to black situation. Oh, yeah, he was killed in a cell today. But actually witnessing that is something that TV will never, ever, ever be able to depict.
yeah, and that's definitely adjusting to the environment, because when you're faced with that level of reality in your face, you either learn to embrace that responsibility or you run away from it. There's no middle on that. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Oh yeah, there's no middle ground on that. It's either fight or flight for sure. You either react or you don't.
And if you don't, there's no
there's
room.
yeah, there's no room, because, you know, that's not a profession where you can kind of freeze up. You know, you're allowed to have that holy shit, this just happened moment, but you still have to react. You still have to try to render medical aid. You still have to, you know, the nurse is coming out there on the rec yard. You still have to provide security for them. And, you know, there's still a ton of things going on at the time. Plus you're trying to secure a weapon. You're trying to secure a convict. It's not one of those where you can just there's no there's no actor or don't act and something in between.
And there's nothing wrong with accepting the fact that maybe this job isn't for you. I think what's wrong is when you try to fake it, knowing it's not for you, and then you still try to fake it. Now, two generalized questions related to adjusting to the environment. Joe, how can rookies mentally prepare themselves for the unique stresses of this job? And is there anything they can do before they start that would help?
Get used to being in a loud environment. Penitentiaries are not, they're not the quiet environment that everybody thinks they are. These guys are hooping and hollering and banging. There's noise going on all the time. You got traffic movements. There's just, the penitentiary is just full of loud noises, speakers going off, radios going off. It's a very loud environment in general. And adjusting to that is hard because, you go from that and then at the end of the day, you jump in your car and it's just totally pin drop quiet. That was something that was hard for me to adjust to the point where, even when I went home to go to bed at night, I had to sleep with the TV on just so I had some noise in the background because it's what I got used to.
For me, I'm going to say, when you're already in, again, people could tell you what to expect, but you got to go through it. I would say embrace the opportunities that, could be the ones that you want to run away from. Don't go to that natural instinct. Embrace the opportunity so you can get used to it. Now, granted, me and Joe discussed this before. There's so many situations that can happen in corrections that you may never truly be ready for, but you could prepare yourself for it. And I think that is a mental mindset. I think that if there is conflict or things that, are happening, you have to make sure that you motivate yourself to go towards it and not run away from it. Because I think that if you kind of sit back in your thoughts and want to stay comfortable, everything's going to tell you to stay away from these situations, and you don't want to do that. So part of this environment is knowing that you're going to go into conflict, be prepared for the conflict, and welcome it. I know it sounds crazy, but welcome it, run towards it, embrace it.
That's exactly what I was fixing to say. Run to it, regardless of whether you're scared or not, over and over. Even if you run to the situation and they already have it handled and there's nothing for you to do, run to it, because over time, not only does your coworker see they can count on you to be there, but it also builds your confidence over time.
Yeah, and then it mentions something about stresses, guys. We've discussed this in the past, but you gotta, if something affects you, you gotta acknowledge it, and then hopefully there's the support that comes your way, both the support that comes your way to help you move forward in the profession, but also more importantly, the support that hits you at a foundational level of who you are, and not, who you are in this profession, but who you are, you as a person. And the second question is, what are some practical tips for maintaining situational awareness without becoming overwhelmed? How did you, Joe, find that balance?
I actually found the balance by playing the what if game. I would apply my correctional awareness to everyday scenarios, whether it's going shopping, going into public areas. I was always watching everything around me. I was looking at people, watching their actions, see how they interact. Kind of the same thing in the penitentiary. I always played the what if game. When I was by myself on the duty post, what if this happened? How, what am I supposed to do? Doing that over and over in your mind. I'm not saying it physically prepares you, but it will help you act physically. Should something happen, it will, build up your confidence level to know that, okay, if this happens, this is what I need to do.
And Joe, I want to add something to that. The what if game has to be an effort to build your confidence, not to set you back. I think the what if game is definitely something that I was introduced to. Actually, I believe it was Russ Hamilton. So I got introduced to it late in my career. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't run scenarios through my head, but I never labeled what I was doing nor made a habit out of it. It would just happen in the moment when I had to make the decision. Russ kind of in shows that we've done in the past, and Joe as well has mentioned the importance of trying to keep that mental decision-making ability going. So but the what if has to be motivated from a state of confidence and not from, a state of fear. Because what if could also go backwards. What if could take you into a whole nother direction where it keeps you frozen. So again, the what ifs are just an effort to make sure that you're committing yourself to an action and not stopping yourself from moving towards what could be a needed reaction. As for me, when it comes to situational awareness, to be honest with you, I think it's so much a part of me now that I just learned to live with it. And I don't think it affects me in a negative way, to be honest with you. I think maybe when I was in this profession, I learned to balance both. I've learned that I don't think situational awareness is a bad thing, but like all things, if it's extreme, then yes, situational awareness can easily, on the extreme side, become paranoia. I think that would be the extreme of situational awareness. So you have to know realistically, when you are being a little bit paranoid, if that makes sense. Joe, does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, because I found myself doing that. If I went to a restaurant, never would sit with my back towards the door. I was always looking at things. I was looking at people, and my wife at the time would look at me and go, "Would you stop that shit? We're eating dinner. We're not in the chow hall. Stop." I was always, it became an extreme until somebody finally pointed it out to me, and then I realized, I took it to an extreme. So, it's definitely that something that can overtake you if you allow it to rule your personal life outside of the correctional facility.
Yeah, and I like what Joe mentioned. I think your family brought you into the real world. Like, I mean, it's tough because having good situational awareness, of course, is good. It definitely is a great tool to have when you're out with your family and whatnot. But if it starts becoming something that starts destroying the relationship you have with your family, like not every Santa Claus is a pedophile. We have to be wary that it could be pushing us to a point where we're paranoid. And to be honest with you, I think situational awareness, or the stuff that the tools or resources that you develop in corrections, I think they're great tools in the real world if it's balanced. If it's balanced, that means that there has to be, if I'm in corrections, of course, I'm a little bit more in tuned. But when I'm out in the real world, you got to kind of just, I'm not going to say cut yourself off because I disagree with that, but you also have to remember you're not in a prison. You have to be, is there a risk? Yeah, you have to be a little bit open, a little bit more when you're outside the prison setting. I'm not going to, and I hate people because people could easily turn this and say, Gangi, there's so much danger in the real world. Yeah, but you can't live your life thinking that there's a danger around every corner, and you can't live your life as if you're walking in a prison.
Yeah.
You can't do that. So you got to balance safety where, okay, yeah, I get it behind the prison wall. I get it because of the environment. Whatever the expectation could be, there could be something dangerous, and it makes sense. The probability there is greater. But when the probability lessens and you're in the real world, again, no one's saying turn things off completely, but there's a point, Joe, and maybe this is definitely something for the rookies to hear. There's a point where maybe in corrections, the tools could get the best of you because that's where they need to be applied. I get it, however controlled, you got to apply it, but I get it. They need to be applied. Like, I would never tell someone, to be a little bit more open or to be less guarded, because that may not fit well in what we're trying to teach overall. But when you're in the real world, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to tell people, guys, if you're that closed off, if you're totally guarded, that's not going to work because there's no time for you to enjoy life. So with that said, I guess at one moment when you're in the prison, the tools could get the best of you, but you still have some level of control, I guess. But I get it. The tools are there. You need them. You got to survive. But in the real world, if you need the tools, you got to make sure the tools don't control you, that you control the tools that you're getting. Does that make sense, Joe?
It does. It makes total and complete sense. I was so bad at one point early in my career that, everybody with a tattoo was suspect. Anybody who wore blue or red or, blue or red sneakers or blue or red belts. Yeah, it was just everybody was suspect to include my wife's family members. They were suspect. I mean, it was crazy the way I looked at the outside world after my first 3 years in the penitentiary. And, like I said, it just, the job itself changes you enough, without, without taking it to the extremes outside. And you definitely got to learn how to shut it off because, even though we got some bad actors out there in the free world, not everybody is a bad actor. It's one of those things that you have to not mentally and physically shut it off. Always be aware of your surroundings, no matter what or where you are. Be aware of dangers. But when there's no danger and you're creating danger just because of your own mental acuity, when you go into a restaurant and the waiter comes over and he's got a tattoo and you're looking at the tattoo and, when you're creating situations yourself without the situations already being there, that's when you're taking it to an extreme.
I think that's what I was trying to look to balance out. I didn't want in any effort to tell people to be turned off to, I get the danger of the prison, but then someone needs to turn off and say, well, Gangi, there's dangers out in the real world. Yeah, but there's also enjoyment out in the real world. If you keep yourself so guarded and so paranoid, the problem is you're going to miss out on everything. You are. And I've seen people do it. I've seen people that, they let the tools get the best of them. They learn these great tools that are meant to really be applied in the prison setting, but could help you in the real world. But when they're applied to the real world, they're applied on your terms, where I may let the prison setting, the tools get the best of me. I get it because that's who I've become. That's the tools are making me this professional. I get it. That's what makes me excel at what I do. But when I'm in the real world, I'm not defined by the profession that much anymore. I'm defined by me. So if I can't let the tools get the best of me, because then what's going to wind up happening, it's going to start to slowly change me into that professional role. Now I'm back to being a correctional officer and everybody around me's inmates.
Yeah.
Is that make sense? That's a good way of looking at it.
It makes sense because I've seen people who had, an awesome social group of friends prior to starting this job. And, a year or two in, you notice these people are slowly but surely kind of cutting off their ties with their friends, not because, they want to, it's just because they feel they have to. And I've seen people that turn themselves to be into a total shut-in because, as soon as they open the door and go out into the world, it's a correctional setting to them. Everybody's a bad actor. Everybody's suspect. I don't want to socialize with anybody because I don't know, your friend's friend may look suspect. So there's so many extremes that correctional officers can let this overtake them.
Joe, there's a shift here where in corrections, to keep yourself that universal precaution. And again, there's balance here, guys. Nothing lives on extremes. So, you have to find where that balance is in the middle. So again, if you have the extremes of the prison and the extremes of the real world, the prison, what they train you is they train you for universal precaution. So you're not gullible, is to and controlled to some level, see the worst in people to some extent before you can see their best. Because if you don't in the prison setting, if you just look at people's best, you can easily get manipulated. And I've accepted that. I understand why it's not meant for you to look at the world in a hateful manner, but to be prepared because your want to help someone could easily be manipulated. So you always have to be aware that there's a wolf. But that doesn't affect how you do your job. It's just an awareness so you can be more effective. And I think to create standards and morals that don't allow for people to creep in and affect your judgment or influence you based on bad intent. And same thing with situations. We're told never to really sit on wins. because at any moment a win could change into a loss, and you got to be prepared for that. But that's the prison setting. The shift, I would say, however balanced it may be, is when you go out into the real world. I don't think you really need to be looking at people as the worst or what's their worst, or the situation is great, but it could get bad. No, you gotta. This is the side where you gotta kind of keep things moving forward in a positive, positive momentum, which means that when I'm out in the real world and I'm talking to people, I do give them the benefit of the doubt, not to the point that I'm gullible, because don't forget, guys, the training I've had in the prison and what I've learned has protected me from being gullible to some extent. I believe so. I believe there's things I learned in just dealing with people in a prison setting, whether I was taught it or whether I learned it through my own intentionality, that has balanced me, which means I'm safe if through any interaction. If I'm dealing with an inmate, yes, I have to be prepared that at any moment the situation could switch. That's my own safety, or that this person could be telling me lies for their own benefit, whatever their intent is. But when I'm in the real world, I am going to give people more benefit of the doubt. But granted, I still have the balance of knowing that, this person could be selling me a bridge. So I'm not completely gullible when I tell people that on the outside world, I do give a little bit more trust. And I do hope that situations that are positive play out a little longer so I could sit back and relax and just enjoy life on my terms. Joe, does that make sense? Because that's where the balance is, right?
It does. It does. And I wish they spent a little more time and gave a little more aggression to that topic during the academies, because we spend so much time trying to open your mental acuity to everything that's going on in the penitentiary. We forget to tell you how to turn that off and not use it in your everyday factor.
Well, Joe, can I ask you, Joe, because I know we get so used to saying that, turn it on. I don't think it is an off or on, Joe. I think it's balancing.
No,
right?
no, it's balancing. I mean, I gave a conference one year to a bunch of correctional supervisors, and it was kind of a half comedy show, half realization show, and and I opened it up with everybody in this room, I went with, how many years do we have in service and all that stuff, raise your hand. And, my opening line to them was, I'm fixing to prove that your ass ain't right. And I'm going to prove it, so I started going through everyday things, things that we did prior to our correctional field, leaving our front door open, letting breezes come through, maybe going somewhere and not locking our vehicles, and then we fast forward 3 years into our corrections profession, and not only are we securing all our objects, like our cars, we pull up to a Walmart and we get out of our car, we lock our door, we get about 20 steps, we lock it again, and when we get to the front door, we lock it one more time, just because we're not sure if we locked it the first 2 times. There are things that you wind up doing, later on that you don't even realize you're doing. For me, it was the car lock thing. I lock it 2-3 times. Why? Because I know my ass ain't right. Because after being in the corrections, you start. It's not really how to turn it off. It's how to balance it without driving yourself insane at the same time.
Yeah, because I think most people are afraid that, and that's why I don't like turning off. Most people are afraid that when they get out to the real world, that they got to, as if everything has to be on extremes, that you got to turn everything off, and then they're afraid that when they cross back into the facility, they won't be able to turn it on. And don't think that way. It's balanced.
No.
I think
it's balanced, because some of these things that you use in your everyday correctional profession in the free world, in case, like if say your neighbor gets broken into or his car gets vandalized or whatever, and you happen to witness it, we're looking at clothing descriptions, we're looking at tattoos, we're looking at stuff that everyday normal people won't see or hear or visualize. There are some things about our correctional awareness that kind of makes us a more descriptive public servant, especially when it comes to things like that, because we can give a better accurate description of tattoos, markings, whatever, because we're already in tune to that, where, the everyday general public, something happens, they can barely remember what color of clothing they're wearing, or if they're black, white, or Hispanic. We're able to take it one step forward. So there are positives to what we do in a corrections profession that carries over into the outside world, but there is a balance between, having those professional attributes that make you a stronger citizen versus being somebody who, I for a lack of a better word, being discriminatory.
Yeah, like in comparison between who you are and the professional role. Yes, when you're in the prison, utilizing the resources and tools that they've taught you. I'm not going to say it's done in an extreme manner, but it's done because that's your role. That's who you are. That's part of your job title. But with that said, when you get to the real world, they're just added tools. But they're not meant to be employed, because if you are not meant to be employed all the time at hypervigilance like you would at a prison setting, because at that point, then you're not going to be who you are at home or who you need to be at home. You're just going to be a correctional officer or whatever it is. The next spot I got here, Joe, is establishing authority and understanding inmate culture. So I'm going to start first with the Barbara Walters question. I'm going to, get personal. Joe, in your early days, how did you go about establishing your authority with inmates? And were there any missteps along the way that taught you valuable lessons?
Yeah, I learned there, that I had several missteps, especially as a correctional officer, because, trying to find your way through the inmate culture, number one, you don't walk into a penitentiary automatically knowing the inmate rules and the inmate codes. There's certain things that they do that, is not really condoned, but it's there's a knowledge of it. As far as establishing my authority, there were times where, I always tried to be firm, fair, and consistent. So I was the type of individual that would enforce the rules, and sometimes it did go to paper. Especially early on in my career, because I was taught that, when you start writing cases, you establish your authority with them, because it makes them understand that, you're not the one to be messed with, and I found that to be more of a falsehood than it was helpful, because I found out that my verbal judo, I was able to resolve a lot more verbally than I ever was with paper. And for me, that kind of gained me a little more respect, knowing that, I could communicate verbally without putting things on paper and still gain compliance. And understanding the inmate culture. I mean, you could have 20 years in the business and you're still learning inmate culture, because it changes, from year to year, because, the inmates are getting younger. The older convicts had one culture. The younger convicts have a new culture, and those two don't meet in the middle, or even the same. Your older generation convicts, they flew below the radar. They knew how to do their time. They never put themselves out on Front Street. They never, if they had to fight somebody, is because they were left with no other choice. This younger generation, this younger inmate culture, man, it's to them, prison is a badge of honor. It's not even a deflection of any kind of wrongdoing. To them, it's just an additional step in street credit for them. So therefore, when they get into their inmate culture is to try to get away with everything and anything that they possibly can, at whatever cost. You think about it 30 years ago, our smuggling problems, they were far and few between, but it did happen. And, now, even with all the technology that we have, the amount of contraband that's coming in now is overwhelmingly. I mean, we're getting it in by staff, we're getting it in by visitors, we're getting it in by drones. I mean, there's a lot of culture, even 20 years in, you still don't know the inmate culture, because it's something that shifts from year to year.
Yeah, I think for me, when I first came in, I may have equated authority to discipline, or like you said, writing up, which they don't equate. Actually, I think write-ups are needed. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're not. I mean, but hear me out in context of what I'm trying to say here, and in agreement with Joe. Authority is a perception. I relate authority to influence. They're very closely related, which means that if I'm constantly writing up people, they're not respecting my authority. They're rather being forced to respect the rules of the facility. For me, I think right off the bat, once you start, finding your way, you got to embrace your ability to make decisions and problem solve. I think that kind of gives you the chance to embrace your role in being a decision maker. But then also, like Joe said, action wise, people start to see your efforts coming out into fruition. And then they start to respect the authority through your actions. As for the culture, to be honest with you, I know it's a different dynamic. I do. I'm not a fool. But it didn't change me. I didn't. I felt that I've seen people that did believe that they would have to come in order to build a rapport with an inmate. They would have to come in, turn their hat on backwards, and try to get down to whatever that inmate's level is. And I've even had people tell me, yeah, there's no way an inmate's going to listen to you because you're not from where they're from. And I'm thinking like, well, wait a second, hold on. Because if that's the case, then what the hell am I doing here? I said, I can't believe that's correct. I just can't believe, because you just minimized a purpose or some type of meaning for me. So I get that you may have to understand a little bit about where they're from, but they also have to understand from you where they need to go. So with that said, I'm not going to be stuck so much in trying to be like them, that my efforts to maybe get them in the right direction is filtered through whatever this dynamic is. No, I'm going to stay who I am, and I'm going to do my best to lift them up. So I think there's a definitely understanding the inmate culture, but also knowing the boundary of that. I don't need to be deeply, I don't need to deeply become an inmate in order to understand it. I could safely review it objectively from a distance, but I do want them to step up. That's why it's very important that we model good behavior, because at the end of the day, we got to give them something that they can promote into, that they could level up into. I'm not going to level down. I'm not there to be their friends. I'm not going to go and put my hat on backwards and try to impress them by how many times I was shot in the hood. That's irrelevant. I'm going to use the experiences that made me a success to try to build a good, honest rapport, because I think even just crossing into being a correctional officer could be an achievement that most may want and that they never achieved. So you're in a position right now that they may not admit it, but they could see as being successful. So I'm not saying you get personal with them, but you lift them up. If you have those moments, some inmates, it doesn't matter. They're just going to be who they are. Okay, so Joe, two questions here related to establishing authority and understanding inmate culture. First question, and sometimes these questions are broken in two parts, but first question broken in two parts because they all seem to be broken in two parts. What are some common mistakes rookies make when trying to establish authority with inmates, and how can these mistakes impact the ability to do their job effectively? I have something real quick. Can I go first with this, show? Is that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
I kind of just mentioned it, but where you equate your authority to discipline and you overuse it. All right, Joe. So yeah, I wanted to get that out there. But go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. That's exactly what I was going to say is, using formal dictionaries for every infraction. For me, if I was going to write an infraction on an inmate, I would, let them know that I was writing an infraction. I wouldn't do it, without letting them, telling them. That's probably one of the biggest issues is writing cases for everything. And, you find out later that some of those you can, take care of verbally. Writing tickets for everything that you come across doesn't gain you respect. It gains the facility respect for the rules and regulations. Like, Anthony said earlier, but it ultimately it does not gain you any respect. When you're able to take care of things, verbally and still gain compliance using good communication skills, to me, that's where you get your respect.
Yeah, and I want to mention, guys, at the very beginning, when you're setting your template, you do have to write a lot. Me and Joe said that before. Russ says as well, because you got to set the foundation, but you don't want to stay there. So this is just something to let you know that, yeah, you're going to do it to set the foundation, let the inmates know what you tolerate, what you don't tolerate. But eventually you are going to break away from pen and paper, and you are going to engage and deal with the conflicts that you can handle that don't go outside your area of responsibility. And as I said, I'm not going to repeat what I just said. Basically, it's, I think, overusing it. And the next question here is, what strategies can rookie use to gain respect from inmates while ensuring they maintain control? And how do you balance being firm but also fair?
Well, again, using your verbal judo, making yourself known, making yourself, I don't want to say an authority, but, communicate your concerns, communicate your expectations when you're on a duty post, and let them know, hey, if you got anything hanging up, I want it taken down. If you got anything covering your lights, I want it off. Uh, you know, I expect, your cells to be in compliance. If you're not in there and you're in the day room, your beds are going to be made, your trash is going to be picked up, your commissary is going to be put away, communicate your expectations. And, as long as you're verbal with these guys and communicate what you expect from them, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, and I want to add just a little. I think context matters. Um, I don't live on extremes. I think I look at the circumstances I'm dealing with, take the context into account, and I make my decisions based on the information I have contextually, and not just based on what we did yesterday. I literally look at the context. So for me, here when it comes to making building professional relationships with the inmates, with peers, whatever it is. Wait, where is it? Is that the inmate? What strategies can rookies use to gain respect from inmates while ensuring they maintain control? It's just understand the context of the situation, objectively, not subjectively, objectively, basically removing yourself and just looking at it from above, and then just being consistent. And by the way, I want to mention something. Consistent, fair. The word fair is a unique word. Firm, I get. You want to stand by the decisions you make, because anytime there's hesitancy, or you start to justify to some extent, there's a weakness. Fair is funny. Fair is a funny word, because fair could be subjective depending on who's on the other end of it. So that's where context matters. So as long as I guess subjectively, that you're being fair, I don't care what other scenarios people could pull out. Well, for such and such or that, it doesn't matter. This is how I'm dealing it. This is what I find to be fair. I don't need to justify it. This is my reason. Done with it. I just want to make sure that when we say the effort to be fair, that we don't leave you open to manipulation, because inmates definitely love to compare. And when they compare, they're questioning your impartiality. Uh, Negative, because I'm going to be honest with you. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to have to do that is the right thing to do, but the person on the receiving end is going to see that as being unfair. Well, it doesn't matter. Don't. Maybe that's how you perceive it, but this works for me. Fair is for you. Fair is for you to contextually look at the situation and make sure you're dealing with it in a fair manner. But don't let somebody else come in and try to play that game that, well, you did for this and you haven't done for this. Could be different situations. Not every situation requires the same response. Consistency, I know some people may look at consistency as, everything requires the same. No, it's not the case. Consistency is understanding the context of the situation and then acting based on what that context is objectively. Fair is a word that gets thrown around too much, and without proper definition or proper context, inmates are able to utilize that. And I've had my parents tell me a long time ago, like, hey, life isn't fair. And what they meant by saying life isn't fair is life may not always be fair to how you believe on your terms it should be. And that's the case. But I think when you're in a position of authority, when you have to balance something that's fair, you have to, it may be based on context that the inmate may not be willing to see or wants to see, but so it's like Russ, and we've said in the past, be firm, fair, and consistent. It's about you. The actions towards the inmates, that's maybe a direct, but it's really about you, yourself. Are you fair? Are you firm? Are you consistent with yourself? All right, so next one, balancing professional relationships. So, Joe, we get a little personal with you again. Can you share a time when you had to navigate tricky relationships with both inmates and colleagues, and how did you maintain your professionalism?
Yeah, I mean, you come across at some point, you'll come across somebody in a penitentiary that you knew, friend of a friend, or maybe a friend you grew up with, friend from high school, sometimes former colleagues. It happens. You know, maintaining your professionalism is one of the most important things you can do in that situation. You don't treat anybody any different than any other. You maintain your partiality and bias and drive on. Um, you know, there's going to be times that, I mean, I've seen people come to me because they had their own family member show up on the unit. And, that's hard. I mean, it's hard enough that you got a strong officer that comes to you and say, hey, look, somebody just shipped my brother here, and I think we may have an issue. Of course, we'll try to get that brother shipped off somewhere else, because ultimately we don't want that officer to lose their professionalism having to deal with them.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, it's if you're working the professional role, it's professional, never personal. You can't let that blend. There's time for personal relationships outside of work. I get it, but not in work. You are a correctional officer. And the funny thing is, even when you have inmates that are trying to push the line, maybe even, try to push some level of emotional connection, you got to realize something. They should not even know you to that level. So it's a game right off the bat. What are they doing? They fall in love because you're a correctional officer? I mean, that's you're the person holding them, behind the wall, because there's no way they should know you on that emotional level for that connection to even exist. So right off the bat, it's got to be some game, because at the end of the day, they shouldn't know you at that deep of a level, especially if you're not keeping things personal, you're keeping things professional. So I think the best thing here, that balance, is stay within that prescribed role and never shift from, being that professional. And again, even if there are personal relationships you want to have with your colleagues to some extent, because it's going to happen, you want to try to limit that to after work. Even though you're going to have some interactions, I get it. But you want to try to make sure that at that point, what's at home stays there, and what's at work stays at work, because God forbid you're talking about things you shouldn't be talking about at the workplace, whatever, just a bunch of stuff. But keep personal where it needs to be, and keep professional where it needs to be. What are some signs that a rookie might be getting too familiar with inmates, and how can they address this before it becomes an issue? I actually discussed this in that ebook I wrote on undue familiarity, so I'm gonna pop it up again here. It's a great book. It talks about the process before you led to corruption. This is when it becomes preventable, but it's really based at first on you noticing that something doesn't feel right. I think corrections should provide a lot of training in this, and whether it's undue the process, or talking more about the games that the inmates play that could lead to corruption. But the reason why I think it should be developed is if you really instill good, positive beliefs based on moral values, and not based on, well, do the right thing or you'll get arrested, or do the right thing because your supervisor's watching or your family's watching. That's crap. Do the right thing because it's in your morals, it's in your values. And if you spend a lot of time teaching that, if you're a rookie and you start to feel, as long as you got the class that's really promoting this, if you start to feel a shift in you that doesn't feel right, that's something inside of you that is going opposite of what you're starting to believe. So if I'm pushing good moral value, a good effort at training you in, why we got to maintain professional and ethical behavior, and I'm going to base it on values and not external consequence. I'm going to base it on values and integrity. The moment you start to feel that shift, you have to correct yourself immediately, because you're going to feel it before any one of us as your peers can recognize it. So I would say the first thing I would say is really develop some intentional training in regards to games inmates play, the crossing of boundaries, and really embrace it as values, as morals. And once there's a shift, recognize it and do what's correct, which is ending it. What's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, and they games people play, Downing the Duck. There's a whole slew of books out there that can relate to this topic in itself. The main thing is, if you're doing things outside your prescribed role to accomplish something for an offender, it's time for you to step back and take a look at yourself. If you're holding elongated conversations with inmates when there's no need to, again, you need to step back and take a look at yourself. There's going to be times you have to interact with inmates. They may have had a death in their family. There are times where you can be empathetic to an offender due to the loss of a family member, a wife, a brother, mother, father, son, daughter, whatever. There are times where that is somewhat acceptable to a point. But just to walk into a duty post and have a long conversation about football, a long conversation about cars, all kinds of stuff. You got to keep in your mind that it could be a setup game. They're trying to pick you apart, trying to find your information, trying to find what your likes and dislikes are, so they know what angle to get at you at.
And the second question is, how can rookies build solid professional relationships with their peers without falling into cliques or negative dynamics, and what role does team cohesion play in their success? If I could just add one thing, and I'll keep this quick because this is something we've discussed in the past too as well, is that, remember, you're not there to impress. And yes, I know you want to belong, but it can't supersede judgment and connecting with the right people. I see a lot of people that look to impress or look to belong, that they're willing to be accepted by anybody. I just got to belong. It's like you can't. You got to kind of know what you want coming in. That this is a career. So you want to hang out with people that are like-minded. You want to hang out with people that take this profession seriously. You can't, as I said, can't let your want to belong supersede common sense. Like these guys or these people here are assholes, but I don't want to be alone. And don't do that at the beginning of your career, because it's all going to come up at the end. Like when you're starting to move up, you're starting to do things. Everything you do from day one matters, including connecting with the right people. So having said that, I would not look to impress, because if you look to impress, you're living on someone else's terms. And the same thing if you look to belong. You have to go in with a proper mindset, what you want from this career, and more importantly, what you expect from others in alignment with making this a career. Who's going to be someone that can help you kind of get on the right path, so this could be a truly successful career. I think that's solid advice, Joe. What do you got on that one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Integrity is defined as doing the right thing even when nobody's looking. We're not there to impress anybody. You're not there to make friends. You're not there to, be something you're not. Don't rearrange your morals and your tactics and your personality to try to fit, other people's beliefs or cliques. Do your job, be fair, be firm, be consistent, do it with integrity, and, do it because not for somebody else, do it because you're wanting to hold to yourself.
All right, Joe. So now we got dealing with stress and burnout, which is popular right now, which is something that we definitely have to address. But it's actually good knowing coming in that this could be a concern. So we do everything we can right from the get-go to set a good path for us. But on a more personal question, Joe, can you recall a particularly stressful or traumatic experience from your first year, and how did you cope with it?
Yeah, I remember going through my first semi-annual shakedown of a facility, outside in the heat, shaking down offenders, shaking down their property out there on the rec yard. It was a 16-hour day from start to finish, and we turned around and did it again the next day, and we did this for 5 days straight out there in the heat. That was probably one of the most stressful times of my life, because you're hot, you're irritable. You got whiny ass inmates out there on the rec yard, as you're doing what you're supposed to do. That can cause you, it caused me stress, but, as far as the burnout, when as correctional professionals, yes, we want you to be dedicated. We want you to be loyal. We want you to be there at work when you're scheduled to do so. That does not mean we don't want you to take a vacation if you need to. That does not mean we don't want you to take a day off here and there if you got the time on the books and you need it. Don't let the job become your life. Learn to separate it, get time away, do what you enjoy, whether it's fishing, ride motorcycles, playing with your dog, whatever. You got to have a coping mechanism to separate yourself from the agency and to give you that decompression time.
Yeah, and I think stress could easily turn to anxiety too. If
Absolutely.
if you're not properly dealing with the concerns when they come, then you get anxious of when they're going to come again. And in corrections, it's going to happen. It's going to happen more than once. And so I think for me, there was one moment where, and guys, I've had a fair share of stuff that happened my way, and I think at whatever level I was at, there are different stressful experiences. It really does depend on your involvement or what your involvement is in that incident. As an officer, it was more immediate, more frontline. As management, it's more of collective concerns that could stress you out, which tend to have greater responsibility connected to it because there's so many moving parts at that level. But I would say, as an officer, because you're right there in the moment most of the time, it could be extremely stressful. You're not removed or a layer removed. As a sergeant, it's still stressful, but I still feel for the officer. I mean, the sergeant may have the stress because the decisions, they'll be probably the ones making those decisions once they get on the scene. Usually they're the first one to make sure things are moving in the right direction. But the officer is usually the person that, whoever the first responder would be at some extent, because even be a teacher, it could be anybody that's immediately there when an incident occurs. But I think you're concerned when you have to react to something and then still maintain your composure. And then once the moment passes, well, I'm okay now. Yeah, but you should still look into it a little bit because you don't want to normalize the abnormal. I know that this is something that may happen every day. But with that said, it's still something that should impact you. Like I think that when an inmate, let's say, as an example, an inmate kills themselves and there's no emotion. And what I mean by emotion, I don't mean you're overwhelmed by emotion. I just think that you're just so cold to a dead body being in front of you. Maybe that's how people cope with it. I get it. But you should maybe also check to see if that is the right way to respond. I've seen people that, they respond, they go through it, they do what they got to do, they maintain their professionalism, get the job done, but then afterward it does affect them, but they're able to maintain their composure. I think when people are too cold in the moment, I think that could also be a concern that they're turning themselves off to certain things. I'm not saying that, some people may have done it so much that it's a routine. I get it, but I've had it happen to me where we had all these suicides. And at one point I had my nephew that killed himself and I couldn't draw the emotion from my nephew because I just kind of grouped them together and I wind up saying things that weren't correct. The routine of it happening in the prison at one point had affected my perspective to the point where when I'm with family, I'm saying things that really, it's not correct. So I think there's a level of, you got to be careful what you turn yourself off to as well. I get you may want to feel that you got to turn yourself off because you got to go through the moment. But I've seen people, as I said, they can handle the emotion in the moment and then they get themselves checked. And where their comfortability comes in is that they know that once they get through this moment, they're going to follow up on them. They're going to follow up on it. So they're able to do what they got to do, however impactful it may be, because they know once this issue has been resolved, within a few hours, they're going to be talking to somebody about it. And that gives them a level of, some level of comfortability or some level of, protection or whatever it is, however you want to word it, where they're able to still be actively involved, hold back on some stuff, but then they quickly have somewhere they can go to go ahead and express their concerns. All right. So the next one is, How can rookies develop healthy coping mechanisms? Well, we kind of just touched that. To manage the stress and trauma that come with the job. Are there specific strategies that have worked well for you or others you've known? And I could be quick on this, Joe. My thing with this is just basically when you feel something has affected you, make sure you're able to, because remember, it affects you as a person. So you got to have someone that you can talk to that knows you, the person wearing the uniform. And then let them kind of work you through. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about you being ready to do your next post, but rather, being ready in life to handle situations. I hate when, you get people that may come to help you, but their ultimate goal would be, can this person do the job? They're evaluating you to see if you're able to do the job, as opposed to someone who knows you and loves you, who's going to really look into you to make sure that you're okay. I'm not evaluating you for a job. I just want to know if you're okay to move forward, to be a father, be the family man that you were, be the family woman that you were. I mean, that's what matters to me, and you better not be looking at being a family man or a father as a job, because it's not. It's something you choose to do because you love those kids. I hate when people say parents, it's hard work. I'm not saying it's of course it's hard work, but it's not a job. It's just hard work. Joe, what's your thoughts on that, Joe? Healthy habits.
Yeah, I mean, there's several avenues. Of course, you got the employee assistance program. If you don't have anybody to talk to that you don't feel comfortable with, the biggest thing is being able to get it off your chest as soon as possible. Even if it's, with your coworkers after the shift is over, damn, there was a lot of blood in that cell. When you get it off your chest and somebody responds, you tend to feel better because you threw it out there, and somebody responded to you. But don't let it just sit and fester inside you, or turn you cold emotionally. Because once it's turned you cold emotionally and you have no emotional response to a traumatic incident, man, that's kind of a dangerous and a bad place to be.
I agree, and I know some people may disguise that as having control, and maybe on the surface you have control of the situation, but I think eventually that starts to take a toll. Now, two more. The next one I got is learning procedures and protocols. So, personal question for you, Joe. Were there any procedures or protocols that you struggled with when you first started, and how did you overcome those challenges or that challenge?
Yeah, I think my biggest thing to overcome was administrative segregation. Because due to the fact that there's so much going on in there, that you're responsible for versus general population. You bring these guys to shower as a group. Once they're done, they get their clothes, they go back to their house. And segregation. You're responsible for feeding these guys singly. You're responsible for showering these guys singly. You're responsible for recreating these guys singly. There was 3 or 4 different forms in administrative segregation, and we had to fill out. One of them was our 30-minute checks for the entire area, cell by cell. And then you had an individual card for each inmate that you had to fill out if they had any kind of refusals, or if medical came to see them, or, if they refused chow or refused to go to rec. There's a lot going on in segregation. That probably took me the longest to learn. But once I got into the habit of working it, it was, the protocols that go with it is overwhelming at times too. But, once you get your hands in there and actually get a load of the process and in tune with the process, it made things a lot easier. But that was probably my most difficult learning curve.
I agree. I'm not going to add on that, because I agree that's one of the hardest areas to work, to make sure that the inmates are getting their out of cell time. I mean, that's the key. And there's so many people watching that right now, that it could be extremely overwhelming, especially when they start pushing the how it has to be done, as opposed to giving you the freedom to develop the how. I would say at the very beginning, policies and procedures are going to define your every move. Well, more so the procedures. You have to understand what policy expects, and then the procedures will guide you through there. And when you may be first in this profession, you may embrace or accept the how, but then you may start to realize, like, sometimes the how could really confine you or make you feel trapped. So I don't want you to get so caught up in how things have to be done, even though you may have to do it a certain way, but sometimes you're dealing with situations that don't allow it to be done in that way. So with that said, as you start to develop, you have to be open to understand that there's a difference between procedure and policy. Procedure is how you get there. Policy is the end result. And if procedure doesn't work, you don't want to get so caught up in trying to make it work that it doesn't work at all. You want to be able now to have the courage, write it to your supervisor and say, hey, listen, I'm trying to do it this way. It's not working. Can we try A, B, C, D? I know a lot of people that really mix up procedure and policy as if they're one and the same, and they're not. What are some of the most challenging procedures or protocols that rookies typically struggle with? I love what Joe said, the balance of inmates' rights, especially in those close custody units where you just have inmates that could act up, that could shut the whole unit down. And then what do these particular areas pose? Why do these particular areas pose such a challenge? Because it's not in your control. I think that's the biggest thing. I think the biggest thing is that sometimes when you develop policy and procedure, the people on the outside try to implement the how. Really straight down to the letter. But what they don't allow is the fact that the situations may not allow for that. So having said that, what do I do? You made procedure so definitive that there's no wiggle room for situations that don't allow that procedure to bring me to the end result. So I think for a rookie, this is where the what if game could happen. Where if you feel that there's a policy in play, but the procedure doesn't work and you're trying, I think if you realize there's a flaw because the situation may not allow it, especially in the areas that Joe said, is to write it up, bring it up to your supervisor. But when you bring it up to your supervisor, you're the one in the best position to come with a solution because you're doing it every day. But what's your thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, and one thing I had to kind of teach myself early on was that, especially in administrative segregation area, the guys that stay locked up in their cells 23 hours a day, except for when they come out for their recreation, the inside of that cell is their world. And believe it or not, we really don't have much control over that. They're controlling it. We don't when we don't gain compliance from them, it's because they don't want to give compliance. And if they don't want to give compliance, then they can make our jobs hell. It's easier to gain compliance from a general population offender because they fear having more liberties lose versus somebody who's already locked up. So if he's not feeling it, man, they can make your day a living hell.
Yeah, and I actually have that in my book coming out, dealing with unruly inmates. It's a small book, about 46 pages, but it's slam packed with a lot of details on dealing with exactly what Joe just mentioned. Basically, managing the loss versus gain system and managing inmates when the rules just don't matter, and you have to try to figure out the middle ground. And the last question here for this section is: what advice would you give to a rookie who's feeling overwhelmed by the amount of information they need to learn, and how can they break it down to more manageable pieces? For me, I never got ahead. I was intentional with my learning. But with that said, I wasn't afraid to ask why things are done because that gives meaning to what you're trying to learn. So if this is what policy is, why is this policy needed? Why are we doing it this way? And the whys are not on judgment. They're really based on curiosity. And a good mentor or a good field training officer should be willing to answer the whys. And I also want to add, don't worry about tomorrow. Worry about learning what you got to do in the moment. And find ways as soon as you can to apply what you're learning. That's the key. So if you're learning something and you're reading something on policy, try to find a way to reflect it into the real world. Because I think that once you see it and once you know why, it stays with you. I listen, I'm in management. I don't know every policy word for word. I don't. And it's harder for me now to memorize it because I don't see it acting out every day. But when I go out on the floor, these officers may not be able to quote policy, but they're doing it. They're doing it every day. They may not know where, like you may put them on the stand and they may not know how to express it word for word. But man, if you could just watch them doing it, they know it. So I think it's just a matter of also through routine and intentional effort, yes. But you know your limits. So I may want to learn these areas today. I'm not going to overwhelm myself. And then I'll see how the day goes tomorrow. So there's some things that you'll passively learn through routine, and there's some things intentionally that you could chase after. And the things that you intentionally chase after are the things I feel that are relevant in the moment. What I got to need to know in the moment, and then any follow-ups I may have after that day is done. So I did ABCD. This was great. I'm going to go home and just kind of review this and prepare for a little bit of some after-hour, at least when you first get the job, to kind of really maybe, make a connection with someone, maybe another rookie, and ask what they've learned, and then try to see if there's something that you guys can share together based on maybe you guys learned how to do counts, so maybe you guys could share in some of the different styles. But I think that the key here is learn then apply, learn then apply. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will your career and your knowledge. As you go through duty post, as an officer, read your post orders, familiarize yourself with what the processes are for that post. And just keep it in mind as you're going. There's no need for a rookie officer to come in on the first day and want to know everything about the escape plan, hostage plan, fire explosion plan, use of force plan. You'll have plenty of time to learn all that. You have supervisors that will guide you through that process if something should happen. There's no need for you to overwhelm yourself with information that you're not going to use on a daily basis, in a routine fashion. Familiarize yourself with your post orders, what you're supposed to be doing on that post. If policies apply, like administrative segregation, not only was there a duty post order, but the administrative segregation plan was in there as well, which described, when you're supposed to shower, when you're supposed to give necessities, when we feed, depending on their level of placement in LAD seg. In Texas, they had 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3. Each level was a little more restrictive in what they were allowed to have property wise. If you want to familiarize yourself with something like that while you're on the post, that's great. But don't overwhelm the hard drive between your ears with information that you're not going to use immediately.
I like that. That's why I like to learn and apply. Now, we've covered this in the past. We can kind of breeze through this last part, but it's inmate manipulation. I have tons of videos on inmate manipulation. I have the books that we mentioned. But Joe, was there a time when you realized you were being manipulated by an inmate, and how did you handle the situation?
Oh, I got manipulated a few times. A convict has 24 hours a day to learn how to manipulate the system. All they do is have time to figure out ways to get around rules and authority. There's been times where I was manipulated for an inmate to have property. There was a time, there were times where, I was manipulated to, bring one from seg down to medical, under the ruse of he was sick, and it was really just so he can, try to get himself, romantically involved with a nurse. There's plenty of times that you're going to get manipulated. You're going to get manipulated in your career. It's going to happen. How you learn and adjust from it from that point on is the bigger factor. Don't, know the processes, know the procedures, know your policies, know your people. Never take an inmate's word, as gospel, because it will lie to you for their own personal gain in a heartbeat. If they say that one of your coworkers said this, go verify the information. And sometimes when you do that, you're going to get a kickback. You don't actually believe I said that shit to that convict, do you? Well, no, that's why I wanted to verify it. I'm not questioning your integrity, or I just want to make sure it wasn't something you said. You're going to have loads of times in your careers where, you either feel like you're being manipulated, or you're going to feel like you got manipulated.
Yeah, and I want to. Whoops, that was all right. I want to also mention something too, guys. Just in regards to this question that Joe mentioned, or I'm sorry, that I mentioned, the personalized question. Manipulation is anytime you feel that you're being pulled from your prescribed role. Trust me, if an inmate is supposed to have something, they don't ask for the most part. They tell you. If it's something that they usually ask for, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're not supposed to have it and they're trying to maneuver. Again, that was advice that was sent to me a long time ago. However you want to apply that in context, I've seen it. When an inmate is supposed to get something, they don't ask, they demand. And when the inmate is questioning if they should have it or not, or trying to manipulate, they usually ask, but they even do social comparisons like, oh, but the sergeant let me have it. Or when Joe works here yesterday, he did. So the point is, I still have to go back with sense of conflict. If you know that something doesn't feel right, you got to act on it immediately before you start to justify it. Because justifying it winds up now starting to push towards what that game is that the inmate is trying to play. So with that said, I think when it comes to manipulation, I really think manipulation, you have to allow it to happen, which means that you feel it first, and then you have to direct it. You have to correct it. You have to, hey, if the inmate's trying to play a game, you got to make sure that they know that it's something that you don't tolerate, and they have to know it comes from you. The internal reasoning. Joe, what are some common manipulation tactics that rookies should be aware of? We talked about that, flattery, stuff like that. If you guys want to get a chance, check out this book I have on manipulation. There's just tons of information that will cover that specifically, because that in itself is literally, it's the topics. It could be forever on that. We discussed that. And then same thing with recognizing and specific signs, same thing. These are topics that can go on forever. So I would redirect you guys to the videos we've done on manipulation. But the big thing here right now is you got to recognize it in yourself first, and then be the immediate response to that. Because if you feel it, then you need to do something about it to correct it. But the biggest concern you have is when you know you're being played, and because you don't want the conflict of saying no, you start to justify it in yourself that it's okay. And that's what opens up the door. And the inmates know that. The inmates know that when they start to play you, they know a lot of people may not want to say no. So what they do is they keep on pushing and pushing, because they know you're going to try to avoid conflict. When if you get up right in their face, nope, that's not going to happen. Sorry, nope, nope, nope. Keep on playing the nope, the broken record, they stop. Hey, Joe, anything you like to say or at least they stop with you? And wait, I want to add something on that. If they try to play you, it's also good to give them that scarlet letter. Let everybody else know that this is what this inmate tried to do today. I think sometimes it's good to document, depending, but if it's a trend, I would document it, because then it lets other people know, when this inmate comes up, they got that big scarlet letter right on them. Hey, Joe, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I hope that this video kind of helps the rookie officers, kind of give them some insight into the norms and the ins and outs of our correctional life. Don't let it overwhelm you. Don't let it overtake your personal life. Just like you don't want your personal life to overtake your correctional life. It can happen. Trust me, as somebody who's been divorced twice, things that happen at home can carry over into work. If you let it, don't. And the same thing with your home life. Your correctional field can kind of carry over into your home life. If you let it, don't. Remember something, that your wife and kids are not inmates. So don't bring that authoritarian home to them. They're your wife and your kids. Learn to separate the two. I hope it gives y'all an insight, into what we deal with or what you could be facing on a daily basis. And, supervisors out there, your frontline supervisors that are out there, sergeants, lieutenants, if you recognize something is wrong with your employees, be the bigger person, step in there and find out what's going on, because you never know what problem somebody's having or how much they're holding in, and they just need a shoulder or an ear to blow it off to.
Yeah, I love that. The key here, guys, is always balance. You don't want to live on the extremes on either side. You always got to find balance in things. I think that, whatever's coming your way, how do I balance it out so it applies? It's applied where it needs to be applied. And you don't get so overwhelmed where it crosses into one area when it shouldn't. But shows like this are great. I mean, it's a small taste of just some questions that you may have. But it's good. There's other videos I have that can cover pretty much a lot for the rookies. But those are great dialogue. Thank you, Joe, for joining in. And as always, guys, the show is taped up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post my video. Stay safe.